Oh, good evening, everybody. Just a little update here on what I'm doing. I just completed the Becker's command with the Dracula figure, and lo and behold, the post office delivered my Newline design Jacobite figures, and also my War of 1812 figures. That's what happens when you can't stick to one subject and get enthused about all sorts of things that you read and you see on television. This is 20 millimeter Jacobite figure, quite nicely cast. Obviously there's going to be a good deal of tartan painting going on here. They really are quite nice figures. I'm very pleased with them. You've got your chap here is going to be holding a standard. He's got a little, well, they've all seemed to have a little bit of beards going on, and of course it wouldn't be complete without a piper. So as I say, I ordered these separately from the War of 1812 figures, but the chap obviously got them at much the same time, and so I got both orders together in a big envelope today, big bulky envelope, and after wiping it over with sanitizing cloth, as we now do, we've got into the habit of everything we bring back from the supermarket, we sanitize. There's some more Highlanders here. I'm going to just show you a representative sample from each bag. They have, I think, Lakeba axe, quite a Braveheart looking aspect to him. Looks like naked upper torso and kilt, and quite well detailed. I do like these figures. Newline designs. I keep calling them Newline miniatures. I don't know if that was a former name or I'm just getting a tad confused in my old age. I have been looking through a couple of books. I've got the two books by Stuart Reid, the Cumberland's Army at Culloden, and also Wargaming with Jacobites, also by Stuart Reid. Not cheap books actually, about £23 or so, and there's not, there's a huge amount of detail in them. I mean, certainly, lovely paintings, and I mean, this is all very good. I mean, I've got the Osprey armies of the Duke of Cumberland and the Jacobite rebellions also from Osprey, but I thought I'd go for these for extra detail. The colour schemes are all there. I think that's the 93rd Argylls there, and Jacobite infantrymen there. So they look very similar to the figures. Got all my reference material. Starting to read a little bit of background detail on the Jacobite rebellions. I mean, I don't let it overlap to the all the rebellions. I mean, starting in 1714. If you want to follow the story of the Jacobite kings trying to reclaim their crown, you're talking about about 30-40 year period. But I'm concentrating on the 1745 rebellion that's the one I'm most enthused about. I've been up to Scotland many times. I've been up to Culloden, seen the battlefield undergo quite radical changes, and you know, they're not always for the good. They're quite sympathetic, the changes to the Culloden battlefield. Actually, they've reclaimed some land that was previously cordoned off, parts of the land that the battle was fought over that were never part of the battlefield as they showed it originally, and that's all good. But they've built a massive visitor centre there now, which has got all the facilities, you know, restaurant, lecture hall, and all these things. But it's whatever they do, these modern buildings, as unobtrusive as they try to be, it's a fairly hefty, ugly looking, great big sort of wooden building, which they've tried to make it part of the landscape, but you'd have to see it yourself to know what I mean. But in the simpler days of even going back just to the 1990s, when I first started to go up there and look at these places regularly, it had a charm about it, a simplicity, a small visitor centre, a small cafe, and yeah, it was a little bit you know, it was a little bit sort of ramshackle, shall we say. I mean, it hadn't at that point had lots of money poured into it, but the main battlefield is still the same. But overall, with the volume of visitors, I mean, you've got to be very choosy about the time you decide to go, because at some points of the day, Culloden battlefield can just be a great horde of people marching up and down the walkways, and it loses the atmosphere, of course. But there's progress, isn't it? It's trying to make as many people as possible interested and comfortable, and you know, it's just it's nostalgia, really. I mean, I just have a liking for you know, the simpler days, the quieter days, when it was just say one man in his little porter cabin showing you where to park, and very little else. But enough of that. I continue with the Jacobites. Yeah, you've got some chaps here with muskets. Apparently most of them did have muskets, particularly during the Battle of Culloden, but they took one shot and threw them down so they could pull out their claymore swords. And apparently the British Army recovered a considerable number of particularly French-made muskets after the battle, where they'd all been thrown down. But the surviving Jacobites managed to you know, make sure that they took their swords, their claymores with them. You know, they weren't going to throw those away. You know, I'm just going to do a small representative force for the Jacobites, and also a relatively small representative force for the government or British troops. There was a little bit of cavalry there. Newline don't do any cavalry suitable for this. Well, for the 18th century, actually, the government troops here are actually from their 7 Years' War range. But couldn't see any cavalry, couldn't see any cannon. Cannon shouldn't be a problem, I guess. The plastic ranges don't seem to really tie in with this scale. I think the plastic are 1/72, and these are 20mm, which I thought was supposed to equate to roughly the same, but I'm hopeless at maths anyway, so well, they didn't anyway. I mean, I think it's Red Box who do rather nice Jacobite, certainly government figures and government allied troops. Their figures don't match up. They're much slenderer and taller. what you see here now is British infantry or government troops with the well-known mitre hat on. Very good detail in there, coming down the front of his coat, the buttons, and altogether quite nicely done. Little bit of flash, but nothing too horrific. They represent, I think I've got about 1 or 2 regiments I purchased. I know they used to draw off the grenadiers and put them into special units at vulnerable areas of the line. But I'm going to have them just in their traditional fashion, you know, at the side of the line troops. I've got here a command unit. Got an ensign with I think it's is it called a spontoon? Sergeant perhaps, but again nicely detailed, and always got to have a drummer. Always got to have a drummer. Again, quite nicely posed and a nice casting. You know, these are very attractive figures. I'm not a salesman for Newline, but been very happy with them. As I say, I usually, well, predominantly did plastics at one time, and I couldn't get on with them really towards the end. I think my fingers have just got entirely, well, they seem to have got bigger, and the figures seem to have got smaller, and I can't seem to deal with bendy rifles and bendy flagpoles. And flash, I mean, is another one. They're better than they used to be in the respect of flash. The plastic figures, some of them have no flash at all really, but I have to say, you know, unlike Gary, Marksman Wargaming, I think is it Marksman Wargaming, who seems to cope brilliantly and produce some wonderful stuff. I just couldn't get on with them. I had a terrible job just the other day trying to assemble a hat rocket detachment, and you know, I was using super glue and everything, and I just could not stuck my fingers together fine, but I could not get the thing assembled, and I started to clean the flash off of the figures, and I couldn't be bothered. But as I say, when I see what Gary produces, I realise, you know, there's an awful lot of work, a lot of good work that has to be done before they get to looking as good as Gary makes. But anyway, I shall press on. I also got some War of 1812 on a previous occasion. As you know, I had announced I was going into War of 1812, and so I brought some figures. This was from after the British burnt Washington. They went on to attempt to capture Baltimore, at that time the most rich city in the United States. But by the time the British had got round to Baltimore, the Americans had somewhat, in reaction to the burning of their capital, had got some of their better troops together, including Commodore Barney's seamen, who had also gone some way to restoring American honour by at least holding up the British on the advance to Washington. And they were withdrawn later to defend Baltimore. And I picked up some of the Napoleonic seamen to stand in. Well, some of them will be standing in for Royal Navy detachments who were there at the time on the attack towards Baltimore, but also to replicate some of the American sailors who were amongst the American land forces. This chap is actually, this range of sailors is actually from Newline's Napoleonic French. He looks a bit Frenchified there actually, but I think we can get them to more or less pass as Americans, who would presumably be getting kit from both the British and the French, one way or another. In addition, I also bought some French line infantry. I noticed the in this scale you can probably get away with it. I mean, I don't think the jackets are entirely correct. There's a bit of epaulettes on there and what have you that shouldn't really be on there for the Americans, but yeah, that's the Royal Naval detachment. There you've got sailor in a hat there with a cutlass and a pistol, and again they will either do for a Royal Naval detachment or the Americans. But getting back to getting back to the land troops of the War of 1812, I picked up a number of figures here, which that's your Royal Marines at the time with the smallish top hats, and yet they will, at the same time, they will also do a job as some of the American militia units from various states. Some of the militia units wore hats remarkably like this, and as I say, the uniforms you can just about get away with. Got some officers there, as I say, that very similar to the one that I painted up for the Paul Becker's challenge, and yeah, a few French infantry, which I'm going to show you here now. You probably can, the experts amongst you will probably see them as being just French, but for my untrained eye, they looked very very similar to some of the bell-shaped shakos that the Americans were wearing at that time. I think I'll get away with that in this scale at least. Maybe trim the odd button off or something. But the helmets look remarkably like some of the ones that the Americans were wearing. The backpack, I don't know if they usually drop them prior to combat. You don't see too many of the backpacks on American troops of that time in the illustrations, but I've got the stovepipe shakos for the early period for both the British and the Americans, and then you've got the Belgic shako with the raised frontage, as worn at Waterloo generally, and in between, as I say, the American army of this time seemed to have this, I believe it's called a bell-shaped shako, and you can more or less, I mean, if you're an expert on the period, you're not going to like it, but for myself, I will let the paint convert them. I think I get away with that as US infantry. Various US infantry regiments, just obviously differentiated by numbers, the 17th, the 24th, and just their jackets. Some are dark blue. They hope to be entirely in dark blue, but some are grey. Famous campaign where they wore grey and the British thought that they were militia. Some of them seem to have purple jackets, and others rather dangerously had got hold of captured ships' cargoes of redcoats, which they wore, or at least some musicians wore, and that can't have been very easy. But thank you very much for sticking with me, if you stuck this long anyway. But I think I'm going to go with the Jacobite rebellion at the moment, and keep this rather sizable lump of metal for the War of 1812 until later. I hope when all this nonsense is over with this virus to get back up to Scotland and generate some real interest in what I'm doing, and take a few videos which I'll hopefully be able to show you. And this time when I go to Culloden, I'll try not to take photographs of just the feet of myself and my family. I might actually include a few photographs of the battlefield, you know, just because I'm a maverick like that and I like to do things a bit different. So I might actually show you some pictures of the actual battlefield. And apologies for photographing my shoes for much of the time. But anyway, hope this finds you well and has been of some interest, and hopefully I shall be back soon with some painted examples. And as I say, I hope you're all well, and all the best to everyone, and hang in there. There is light at the end of the tunnel, apparently. It could be a train, but I've been told by the government, and who doesn't believe them, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So let's hope for the best, lads. Bye.